Hi, I'm Christy Bowman, and I'm a Science Content Specialist at the Ohio Resource Center for Mathematics, Science, and Reading, more commonly known as ORC. Welcome to today's podcast that focuses on the New Teacher Survival Guide. Whether you've been in the classroom for 1 year or 10 years, this survival guide contains resources and issues pertinent to all science teachers. I am going to begin this podcast by talking about summative and formative assessment, and then conclude by talking about some of the resources found in the assessment section of the New Teacher Survival Guide. Along with today's podcast, a wealth of resources is also available to you on the ORC website at www.ohioRC.org. You can also check out many collections of resources and the Science Teacher bookshelf specifically related to this podcast by going to the section for science educators on our website and clicking on New Teacher Survival Guide in the upper right corner of the page. These resources, books, and materials would make a great addition to any teacher's professional library. Don't forget to check these out at the end of the podcast by going to the New Teacher Survival Guide on ORC's website. So, why do science teachers in particular need a section in the New Teacher Survival Guide devoted to assessment? In order to effectively prepare students for the science portion of the Ohio Achievement Test given to students in May at the end of the 5th and 8th grades and the Ohio Graduation Test given in March of the 10th grade year, science teachers have to teach science content while also incorporating the process skills found in the scientific inquiry, scientific ways of knowing, and science and technology standards. Also, science teachers need to regularly embed assessments into lessons in order to get feedback on students' understanding of the content and to inform instruction. Resources found in the assessment section of the New Teacher Survival Guide can help you do just that. There are two types of assessment, summative and formative. The New Teacher Survival Guide has resources devoted to both types. Let's talk about summative assessment first. According to the Northwest Regional Educational Laboratory, ORC resource number 9172, summative assessments are most often administered at the conclusion of a lesson, unit, or grading period. They provide a summation of what a student knows at that point in time. Summative assessments are often used for reporting student achievement levels to districts and states, for assigning grades, and for determining whether to place a student in an advanced or remedial class. The New Teacher Survival Guide has numerous resources on summative assessment. The next three resources are examples of summative assessments that can be found in the assessment section of the New Teacher Survival Guide. The first resource is ORC resource number 8009, A Look at the OGT, Considering Science. This resource is an article written by ORC Science Content Specialist Terry Shiverdecker. It describes the science portion of the Ohio Graduation Test, which is a graduation requirement given in the spring of the 10th grade. The article examines science test items and looks at instructional strategies that can be used to increase student achievement in science. A thorough description of the test is included, along with sample problems that address what students will need to be able to do in order to solve those problems. The second summative assessment resource example is ORC resource number 10701, the May 2007 full-length practice test for the Ohio Achievement Test in 5th grade science. This test can be very useful because it allows you and your students to see the format of a full Ohio Achievement Test. Aside from using this test as a practice test for your students, consider the following: using the individual questions as formative assessments, or rewording the questions to get students to think about the content differently. For example, changing the type of question from a recall to an application question, or incorporating test questions into various chapters or units as pre- and post-assessments. Let's talk about each one of these examples for a couple of minutes. The first example is using the individual questions from a previously released full or practice test as formative assessments in the classroom. For example, ORC resource number 11483 is a multiple-choice test item used on the spring 2008 Ohio Graduation Test. Since this is a released test item from the 10th grade OGT, this question could be used as a 10th grade example of how to use previously released test items as formative assessments in your classroom. The question itself contains a graph that shows the seismic wave velocities at various depths within the Earth. It asks students to determine which point marks the beginning of Earth's liquid outer core. So, How could you use this as a formative assessment in your classroom? Rather than giving this question to your students and having them answer it, give your students this question and tell them that answer choice C is correct. Have them explain in their science journals or next to the question itself why choice C is correct and why A, B, and D are incorrect. Take a look at point C on the graph. This choice is correct because you will notice that the S wave speed goes to 0. In order to correctly answer this, students must recall that there are two types of seismic waves, S and P waves. S waves cannot travel through liquid media, whereas P waves can. Given this information, students should be able to interpret the graph to find that the S wave speed goes to 0 at point C on the graph. If you will look at answer choice A, you will notice that the speeds of both the P wave and the S wave are above 0. And since the S wave cannot travel through liquid media, this cannot be the beginning of Earth's liquid outer core. Therefore, the S wave speed would have to be at 0 if this were in fact the liquid outer core. Therefore, this choice is incorrect. Answer choice B is incorrect because both the P wave and the S wave are also traveling at speeds above 0. Since the S wave can only travel through solid media, this must be a solid part of Earth's interior. And lastly, answer choice D is incorrect because at this point, the S wave is traveling at a non-zero speed, so this must be a solid part of Earth's interior. By asking students to explain each choice, you will gain insight into students' thinking on the topic of seismic waves and any possible misconceptions that may exist, and then adjust your instruction accordingly. The second option of how to use previously released test items in your classroom as formative assessments asks you to reword the assessment. For example, ORC resource number 11484 is a multiple choice test item used on the spring 2008 Ohio Achievement Test for Grade 5 Science. This question could be used as a 5th grade example of how to use a previously released test item as a formative assessment in your classroom by changing the wording of the question in order to change the cognitive demand or thinking skills required to correctly answer the question. The original question states, from which part of the plant does a bee get its food? Choice A states a flower. Choice B, seed. Choice C, stem. And choice D, root. Students have to recall where a bee gets its food from in order to correctly answer this question. In order to change the cognitive demand of this question from a recall question to a communicating, understanding, and analyzing science information question, change the wording of the question to read, draw a picture of a plant, and then label and briefly describe a function or important fact for the stem, flower, and root. Also draw a piece of fruit, such as an apple, and then label and state the function for the seeds inside of the apple. Lastly, circle the part of the plant that a bee would get its food from. Ask students probing questions to promote deeper thinking while they are drawing, and then give them a couple of minutes to receive feedback on their drawings from their peers once their drawings are completed. This formative assessment strategy is an example of an annotated student drawing that can be done individually or as a small group assignment using whiteboards or a large sheet of paper. It requires a small amount of time, is easy to implement, changes the thinking skills required to successfully answer this question, and you in turn gain insight into students' thoughts on plant structures and their functions. The third option is an 8th grade example that demonstrates how to incorporate previously released test questions into a unit as a pre- and post-assessment. ORC resource number 10835 is a previously released test item taken from the 8th grade Ohio Achievement Test in Science from the May 2007 test. It provides students with weather data both in a table and in a graph. This multiple choice question asks students to interpret a weather map and identify the city in which there will be fog at a given time. In order to use this as a pre-assessment, use this question at the beginning of a unit on weather. Give students a copy of the data table and graph. Have them tape the data table and weather map into their science journals. Have them write down the following question in their science journal next to the data table and graph. Look at the weather map and the table for Sunday at 6 a.m. Fog was reported for one city on Sunday morning at 6 a.m. Which city was it? A, Dallas. B, Miami. C, Minneapolis, or D, Seattle. Give your students the correct answer and have them circle it. Then have them explain why it is correct in their science journals. Then, after you have completed your unit on weather, ask your students to go back in their science journals to this question. Have them look at the response at the beginning of the unit and then revise it as needed. As an extension, have them explain why the other 3 choices are incorrect, since they should now know why the other 3 choices are in fact incorrect. When all of your students are finished, take a look at their science journals to analyze whether or not misconceptions about fog formation still exist in order to adjust your instruction accordingly. Hopefully, these 3 suggestions will provide some ideas for how to use previously released test items into your classrooms as formative assessments. If you'd like to see examples of types of formative assessments, go to the Science Bookshelf by clicking on the New Teacher's Survival Guide and clicking on Assessment, or go to www.ohioRC.org. You will find practical examples of formative assessments that can be used in the classroom. And now on to our third summative assessment example, ORC resource number 9161. This summative assessment resource is a blueprint for the 8th grade science portion of the Ohio Achievement Test. The blueprint contains information about individual tests and identifies the number of test items by category: short answer, multiple choice, or extended response. Not only are summative assessments important to use in your classroom, but formative assessments should be incorporated frequently as well. So what is formative assessment and why should you use it? According to ORC resource number 9172, Assessment Strategies to Inform Science and Mathematics Instruction, It's Just Good Teaching, formative assessments are often administered during a lesson, and they help teachers to ascertain how students are progressing in their learning. Formative assessments often include student demonstrations, written projects, and interviews between teacher and student. Formative assessments are not used for grading purposes, but provide both teacher and student with valuable feedback about the student's progress. Teachers can use this information to make informed decisions about their teaching, such as adjusting the rate of instruction, assigning remedial activities, and planning alternative experiences. The next 3 resources are examples of ORC resources that contain examples of formative assessments and can be found in the assessment section of the New Teacher Survival Guide. The first resource is ORC resource number 9172, Assessment Strategies to Inform Science and Mathematics Instruction, It's Just Good Teaching. This professional resource stresses the key role that ongoing classroom assessments play in effective teaching. The publication gives an overview of the reasoning behind assessment to inform instruction and outlines a variety of strategies, including interviews, observations, writing activities, and student self-assessment. The mini collection that goes along with today's podcast provides you with ORC resources that incorporate these formative assessments into them. What Do Wrong Answers Tell Us? The second resource that provides formative assessment examples is an article that provides you with ideas for how to use released OGT items as formative assessments in your classroom. More specifically, this article analyzes several released OGT items and offers some instructional strategies for using these items to enhance student learning in the classroom. It is the feature article for a set of interrelated materials focusing on how item analysis of released OGT questions can shed light on student misconceptions and how these questions can be used in instruction. This article has many practical applications for the classroom. The third ORC resource is ORC resource number 10642. Assessment to Inform, assessing both science content and science process skills. This is a professional resource that highlights the ongoing assessment strategies used to monitor students' progress not only toward learning scientific facts, but also toward mastering scientific process skills and scientific ways of thinking. The assessment strategies examined in this article include portfolios, interviews and questioning, science journals, concept maps, drawings and diagrams, and performance assessments. In addition to the resources on formative and summative assessments found in the assessment section of the New Teacher Survival Guide, released science OAT and OGT items can be found in ORC's searchable database. You can get to this search by finding search resources in the light blue box in the left navigation on any page of our website at www.ohioRC.org. I would like to thank you for joining me for today's podcast focusing on the assessment section of the New Teacher Survival Guide. Don't forget to check out the additional print materials and mini collection of resources that supplement this podcast by going to the New Teacher Survival Guide on ORC's website. This session is also available via an RSS feed and is downloadable via iTunes. Stay tuned for additional sessions focusing on other categories in the New Teacher Survival Guide. For the Ohio Resource Center, I'm Christy Bowman, hoping you gain some insight into assessment and the assessment resources found in the New Teacher Survival Guide.